Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. So lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces. So let's just have a quick look, Alice, if you can just move the slide, about what we're going to cover today. I'd first like to welcome Minter and Michael. Minter has joined us several times on Strategy Café. And he has really helped us to flesh out this series around AI. And today we're very fortunate to also have Michael Borrelli join us. And Michael is the co-CEO, COO of a company called AI and Partners. We were having a very interesting discussion about what he's been up to this week in the world of AI. So we're very lucky to have Michael join us and give us his views, insights, thoughts this morning. So welcome, and a huge thank you to our two guests this morning. We're going to be talking today about AI regulation and governance, what it's about, what do we need to do, who needs to regulate, what can companies start with. So a bit of a broader overview, and hopefully one or two good next practical steps for you. We invite you to also contribute. We will be having some polls, so please, we'd love to have your voices added to the conversation. Participate as much as you can, address some questions, put some comments in to the chat. We'd love it to be as interactive as possible. And then we're going to also give you an overview of what you can expect in our next Strategy Cafe. So Minter and Michael, thank you so much for being here again this morning. I think we should perhaps kick off with a little bit of an introduction to our topic today. Alice, if you can move us along, that would be great. Our Strategy Cafe sessions on AI really started with unpacking Minter's book called Artificial Intelligence, which was an updated edition and which we had previously featured before. And we then went on to a discussion about what we were doing practically as non-experts in this area, but as a company ourselves. And where we've landed today is really on this discussion, which is a kind of really natural progression around the adoption of AI and really regulation and governance. And so to start with, perhaps we'd like to think about, Alice, you can bring up the first poll if you'd like. We'd like to think about, where we are at the moment, and perhaps just consider your general opinion on AI. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it mixed? Do you have mixed feelings about it? What are your thoughts? How interesting. So we're looking at a right down the middle, 50% positive and 50% mixed feelings. How interesting. Perhaps I'd like to open up the mics to both Minter and to Michael. What's your feedback on the poll results?
I'd say it's pretty, if I mind going first and just start off, thank you for having me on Strategy Cafe. It's an honor to be here. I think it's interesting. I think people are being a lot more receptive to it and its capabilities, and I think a lot of the education element has proven that, and the continued publicity. I think people are taking more of an interest in it, and it's gone beyond being just an academic theoretical exercise, and people can see the practical benefits. And I think fear could drive sort of negative sentiment, and so the continued education and the data that's coming out that people can trust is really helping.
Thanks, Michael. Minter, anything to add?
Yeah, my basic thought is that however you see AI will also impact the way it comes out for you when you're working with it. I think there's a an element of fear that can really block people's opportunities with AI. It's good to have cynicism. It's good to have worry about things, of course. However, in balance, what I've seen is that depending on your general opinion of AI, you'll have an impact on the way you develop it.
Mm, what a beautiful viewpoint. Thank you. So, if we think about the scale of adoption and the pace of kind of AI development, um, uh, what do we think the current state of AI regulation is? And where are we right now, Minter? Maybe you can kick us off.
Mm. Well, I think the current state of regulation is catch up. There's whether it's on a global scale, it's not happening, of course. And yet, probably a lot of the impact of AI will be cross border. And as far as the adoption is concerned, I think it's far wider than we think and probably less deep than we think at some level. Wider in that everybody's really beginning, even my mother, who's 85, has come to settle in with Siri, and Alexa is all over my sister's home when she controls everything from it. So there are many people who have experienced the better typing prompts on Google and such. And then, as far as the depth is concerned, and my specific area, and by the way, the book is called Artificial Empathy. And the issue or the point there is that a lot of people concerned about the humanization or the complete takeover and all that, the general intelligence problem is very far away from a reality today. And for example, having a machine that's perfectly empathic with everybody, not going to happen.
Mm. Michael, where are we? What's the state today?
So I think the question is very pertinent considering where we are. So at the start of this week, we had the trilogue talks on the EU AI Act, with apparently now 70% of the text is now finalised. And then we are also in the middle or sandwiched between the UK's scheduled UK Safety Summit talks next week. So we are in right now, we're at the stage of potentially the world's first regulation being enacted. Um, and the UK possibly following suit. And other countries are, as I believe, considering their uh, respective takes on it. I know China and the US are pretty advanced, and we've helped the some APAC countries sort of develop their policy there. So it's interesting, but I love it. Minter's sort of micro level view on that of AI usage, and we're just seeing it everywhere. We're seeing people using AI enabled functionalities in their phone. People are being able to do stuff more quickly and effectively. So I think the regulation is certainly catching up, but the pace of innovation, to use an example with the crypto asset industry, possibly wasn't as fast. Whereas the pace is such that the regulation has to catch up, and I think we're seeing that with pretty much every agenda, whether it's on a legislator or senior business executives,
Mm.
really taking this seriously.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And that brings us beautifully to the next point, which is really with this pace of innovation, to what extent do you agree that we ought to hold AI to a higher standard than we hold companies or ourselves? Wow, really mixed bag, right? So 20% say they strongly agree, um, 40% say agree, 20% say neither disagree or agree, 10% disagree, and 10% strongly disagree with that. So a very mixed bag. I think the majority say that they agree with the statement, that we should hold AI to a higher standard than we hold ourselves in society. Any comments on those results, Minter, perhaps, or Michael?
Well, I certainly have a thought about that, and I wonder to what extent we can even know what that standard is if we don't know how to do it ourselves. So I think about that, and I think about the access to innovation if we hold it to too high a standard. That's what my thoughts are. But I'd be
Mm.
very interested to hear why people feel that we should have a higher standard.
Feel free to pop some comments in the chat, everybody. Michael, any thoughts on the poll results?
I think it. I think it's reflective of. I think it's pretty balanced, maybe in comparison to the other poll. You see more people are agreeing. I think not. It's not just a standard as well. It's who should enforce them, and how regularly. So having a standard is fine and acceptable, however you have it. And as we talked earlier about indexes, but it's about who uses it, and who sort of who enforces it, if that's possibly too strong a term. But I think it's in ensuring that whether it's a collective or individual or a hybrid responsibility to maintain these standards, but ultimately the purpose is to, in furtherance of society, and
Mm.
innovation certainly has a role to play with that.
Absolutely. And I think a good point there, thank you so much, Alice. You can move to the next slide. I think a good point there is really who is going to be responsible, right? Or who is responsible, to regulate and govern AI. How much should we be regulating it? And who's currently doing what? So I'd love to hear some voices about, whose responsibility do we think it is to govern and regulate? And I know that there's a lot going on, and a lot has happened during the course of this week that you were referring to, Michael.
Well, there's probably too much going on for me to certainly keep on top of all it. I do try. But the different approaches being shown by different countries can provide a better answer to that question. So to give you context, the European approach is more risk-based, and now there's potential talks about having a tiered approach, whereas the UK's proposed blueprint, which will be discussed next week, is focusing on a sectoral approach. So having different standards for, say, manufacturing as there would be for healthcare, financial services, or more highly regulated industries, so that the burden will ostensibly always fall on the company or the target of the regulation. But then you may have some industry bodies, industry standards, and other member associations. And I know Minter's probably probably has some interesting perspectives on that, considering his you know broad appeal in that sense. But I think I think collectively we all have responsibility, and especially with it changing so many aspects of society today.
Thank you. Minter, your thoughts?
Well, I wonder to what extent people in government or in governmental bodies really understand down deep how it all works, and that we don't end up with regulations that just cause a lot of paperwork and headache for companies. My strong conviction is that we must think about, on one hand, what is legal, and then the other one, what is ethical. And it's not because it's legal that it is ethical. And at the end of the day, regulation is going to push us to deal with what is legal, correct? And so what it will come down to, as Michael says, is going to be how companies ponder it. What are they trying to do? What is their intention? And I think today, even most of the senior executives I hang out with are pretty confused, or at least not clear, on what is happening, how the AI is working, and how on earth they might be able to control it. And on the other hand, you have issues of confidentiality, and so calls to be more transparent about the outcomes. A will be complicated to do, and B could also expose companies' strategies and some other confidentiality. So I think it's going to end up being absolutely the responsibility of each organization to look at themselves in the mirror, understand themselves better, understand what their intentions are doing, including what their business model is, to think about how they want to organize their AI to be effective, not to forget the other piece, which is how are they going to adapt with AI? How are their employees going to adapt from fear or not of losing their position to AI? So there are a whole lot of different things that
Mm.
senior executives are having to face today, which are going to be complicated and will need a team to do, because no single individual is going to be able to understand this and to translate it into some kind of text that shows this is who we are, this is how our AI operates.
Mm. And I would assume, Minter, that there's a point there around companies really delving into and questioning their own ethical frameworks. What their own ethical standpoints are on certain things, on certain aspects. I don't know. What's your thought on that? Yes, maybe?
Well, so I think there are several types of companies, pharmaceuticals, media, journalism anyway, that generally should have a chief ethical officer in the form of some sort of lawyer with a do good streak. But for the most part, the idea of ethics rarely comes up in boardroom discussions, much less a clear ethical framework that everybody in the organization understands. And that's a difficult thing to do. It's sort of like explaining culture. There might be an ethic, there might be a culture, but it's sort of hard for people to put their hands around unless someone has a very strong storytelling notion within the board to get through and tell everybody this is what we mean by ethical behavior. These are the key words, and these are the types of behaviors that we expect to explicit that culture or that ethic. And so, especially when you get down to the people who are responsible for the coding, they are often not top of the board. You know, these obviously digitally only companies, a la Google, it's different. But let's say you're generally an industry player and you want to use AI for your factory floor, or you want to use AI for your marketing decisions. The
Mm.
coding of that, which will require an understanding of your ethical framework, is your organization prepared to go down that deep and make sure everybody understands what exactly that means? And I think that will
Mm.
take a whole lot of intentionality to happen at a company level.
Really interesting view there. And if we think about kind of what might the implications of kind of being implementing maybe too much governance around certain things, and what might the implications be of on a broader scale, maybe some under regulations that haven't been thought about. I think it might be a good thing to explore the implications of both on that micro and that macro level, right? Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, a few. I think I love the way you presented it. Then the first thing that springs to mind is when you oscillate between things. So I think depending on the depending on the context and where what the demands of the economy are or broader society, where the impact is going to be, the impact on it is going to be different. As with all things, the impact is contextual, and it depends on the substance and the weighting assigned to it. So, for example, at the moment, the risk for potentially the UK government of under-regulating is you allow companies to operate potentially ultra vires, whereas if you over-regulate, the impact, it could potentially stymie innovation at a time when the economy probably needs a bit more, stimulus to help drive it forward. So I think with all things, it is contextual, and it's quite difficult to just look at things in isolation, and just to say this is a matter of fact, this is what happens. But in a time of great uncertainty, I think people like certainty, people crave it, and humanity needs. I think we need a bit of certainty in certain things that we do. Probably Minter probably knows a bit more about this than I do, but I think I think we regulation provides a bit of stability, and I think at a time when you're seeing a lot of, again, general uncertainty across sectors, markets, and aspects of society, I think this is a broader question for policymakers to consider.
Thank you.
I have an additional point, which looks at how Europe has done the GDPR and this notion of privacy. And I think it's a really relevant zone within
Mm.
AI regulation, because in the end of the day, we can sort of get excited or upset or worried about the outputs of the AI, but the data learning sets are going to be absolutely vital. And to what extent is privacy going to be overrun in the way that the AI is working? You know, pops up something where Wanda Haddock said this kind of thing, where that was not something you gave permission for. And the approach to data sets, I think, is going to be absolutely strategic for organizations. On the one hand, you have the large learning models that are sort of generally out there, let's say somewhat open AI and all that. But your role as a company will be to, I think, if you want to be strategic about this, is to have a data set that will become proprietary to you and your customers, and learning how to use effectively that information so there's a real value perceived by your customers or potential customers is going to be vital. And earning the trust to use the data of your customers. So how you manage that interplay in order to make your AI effective.
No, that's such a rich comment. Yeah, and I think that leads us on to our next point quite beautifully, which is really if we think about things and where we are today, what is it that businesses most need to understand? What can they do as a first next step? What should they be thinking about right now or preparing for right now? Just to bring things to a really kind of practical level and to bring some discussions that they should or could be having. Minter, you want to kick us off?
Well, I did want to address David's comments in the chat, and surely there will need to be some AI regulation. I want to reference a conversation I had with a woman who's particularly familiar with what's going on in China, Ashley Dudoranek, who she lives in Hong Kong but works in China, and she basically laid out to me that the Chinese do not wish to put any regulation on their AI because they want to do it and sort of ask for permission later as a strategic approach, nationally speaking, and they perceive the West as over-regulating, sort of immediately clipping wings right away. Anyway, that was just a perspective, and speaks to the nature of the beast. Because if you're a company vying against another company in a certain industry, and the Chinese company doesn't have any regulation, you will be definitely handicapped. When it comes to other players that are more, let's say, evil state terrorists and such, well, that's not going to be possible to regulate any more than the United Nations successfully manages to bring everyone who does acts against humanity to account. It's a challenging area, global regulation, and there's lots of different cultural bents on it. One of the areas that I think is really supremely interesting. So I look at these things much more from a company perspective than a government perspective. I have no knowledge of exactly what's going on behind those closed doors. However, one of the things that really needs to be thought of if you're a business is to understand how you're going to use the AI for your business and what impact it's going to have on your systems and your people. And I think that while in the group that we had today, only 5% or 50% said that they have mixed feelings, and no one said negative feelings. I think there are a lot of people in business that have a worry about whether they will keep their job, whether they will be capable of doing the job. So I think that's one big area, is the impact of AI on your systems and your people, and how are you going to manage that, all the while keeping your strategy going.
Beautiful, thank you. Your thoughts? Where are businesses today in terms of understanding what next steps are, Michael? What can they be doing?
I would like to build on Minter's excellent comparison with GDPR. I think, and I use that as the answer here. So with GDPR, there was what happened is businesses sort of reacted a bit possibly could have reacted earlier than they did, and there was a manic sprint to the finish line. So I think today what they could do is just prepare early for the incoming regulation, specifically the EU AI Act and others. And I think what they can start to do is start considering tools and techniques and practical solutions to ensure to ensure compliance. For example, there are solutions out there that GRC platforms that can help identify and then risk classify AI systems. So in that sense, what we recommend is identifying your AI exposure to know exactly where your pain points are, or which business divisions, which functions, or which organizations, depending which perspective you're looking at this, where your AI exposure is greatest, to then enable business leaders to take decisions on how to manage that risk, whether to de-risk or up-risk, or to do whatever is in the company's mandate. So this, I think, in the age we are, it has to be a data-driven approach to be able to make decisions that will ultimately help drive the business going forward. But there's a certain certainty with the regulation coming, and I do strongly believe it's about, as part of the readiness journey, understanding your exposure and equipping yourself with the tools and techniques to be able to overcome these challenges and to avoid the pitfalls and challenges that were present during GDPR and such like.
Any starting points for businesses practically? If where would you start, Michael, perhaps? And then I'll take that to you, Minter. Where would you start on that journey? What would your approach be?
I would start by knowing as I said, the AI exposure. So I would review the regulations. I would get it, a point has been said, probably a chief ethics officer and a chief AI officer discuss and get governance committees and policies established, and getting all the infrastructure in place, and then equipping yourself with tools, whether they're sourced from third parties, and getting external assistance from consultancies and professional services firms to help you understand the business, because as Minter said, no single person can do this alone. It's fiendishly complex, especially with the technical aspects and complexities of this. A lot of assistance, a lot of help and infrastructure is needed, but it's all out there. And I think to avoid what happened with GDPR, it's just about equipping the business, equipping itself with the necessary measures to overcome these challenges.
Thank you. Minter, if you had a company and you were embarking on this journey, where would you start?
Well, I will start where you need to start, which is with your strategy. And what are you strategically looking at as big imperatives for the next 3 to 5 years? And then I would be starting with, well, where can and how can AI participate in that strategy? Because that's where I want to focus my investment and resources. I mean, bottom line is AI could be used pretty much everywhere for anything, and one needs to be strategic about it, and certainly looking at, I feel, finding a way to have a proprietary database of learning models is going to be something that needs to be built over time. And then when you're looking at your strategy, think about your culture, and how does that translate when it comes to the way the machine should be operating? How are we internally? How really are we internally? And be honest about that. It's a good opportunity to look under the cover, feel who you are, because if you understand that well and have some self-awareness and honesty about it, I think it'll help you to create an AI that can participate in enhancing and, let's say, continuing your culture, as opposed to being some sort of divisional idea. And back to the idea of standard, I think it'll be relevant to have a standard, but that is similar to the way you hold yourselves accountable, because it would, I think, be stultifyingly difficult to get a strong AI if you hold it to a higher standard than you hold your own employees.
What a beautiful, rich discussion, and we're going to allow for some questions in a moment. Thank you both for all your views and contributions this morning, and thank you to everybody on the chat. There will be an opportunity for you in a moment to just ask your questions directly into the group, so please stay with us. Alice, we've got our next strategy cafe coming up. and we don't have details as yet, but please keep an eye on your inbox for our November Strategy Cafe and the topic and who we will be inviting on that day. And now we're going to stop the recording, and we're going to invite you all to contribute your voices and to ask any questions directly into Minter or Michael.